I'm Alex Morgan, 28. I'm what the intelligence community calls a digital ghost. The hacker governments hire when they need someone erased from existence. 3 days ago, I received a payment of $50 million to delete specific files from 7 different government servers across 3 continents. I thought it was just another job until I saw what those files contained. The truth about what really happened in 2019 isn't just classified, it's world-ending. Now I'm sitting in a safe house in Prague, and the same people who paid me are trying to kill me. What I'm about to tell you will shatter everything you believe about your government. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why 3 nations are already mobilizing their armies. Like and subscribe if you've ever wondered what secrets your government is really hiding, because what I discovered makes every conspiracy theory look like a bedtime story. Let me tell you how I became the world's most dangerous hacker, because understanding my past is crucial to understanding why what I found changes everything. I wasn't always a digital ghost. At 14, I was just another kid in foster care. In Detroit, bouncing between homes, using computers at the library to escape reality. But I had a gift: I could see patterns in code that others missed, vulnerabilities that seemed invisible to everyone else. By 16, I was already breaking into corporate networks, not for money, but for the thrill of proving I could do it. MIT offered me a full scholarship when I turned 17. For 2 years, I was the golden boy of their computer science program, till I discovered something that would change my life forever. Professor Williams, my mentor, and the only person who ever believed in me, was being systematically destroyed by the university administration. They were falsifying research data, stealing his work, and planning to destroy his career over a patent dispute worth millions. I couldn't let that happen. So I did what I do best. I hacked into the administration's servers and exposed everything. Every corrupt email, every forged document, every backroom deal. I thought I was doing the right thing, fighting for justice. Instead, I learned my first harsh lesson about the real world. Sometimes the truth isn't enough. The university buried the scandal, discredited Professor Williams anyway, and expelled me for unauthorized access to computer systems. I was 19 years old, academically brilliant, and completely disillusioned with the system. I thought I could change. That's when they found me. Not the police, the intelligence community. A man named Richardson approached me at a coffee shop near campus. 3 days after my expulsion, he knew everything about me, everything about the hack, and he made me an offer I couldn't refuse: work for them, or face federal charges that would put me in prison for 20 years. My first job was simple: make a problem disappear. CIA asset had blown his cover, and there was digital evidence scattered across 17 different servers that could expose an entire intelligence network. They needed someone who could get in, clean up the mess, and get out without leaving a trace. They needed a ghost. I spent 3 weeks erasing that man's digital existence. Every photo, every document, every trace that he had ever worked for the agency. It was surgical, precise, and when I was done, it was as if he had never existed at all. The asset lived, the network remained intact. I learned I had a talent for making people disappear. That was 9 years ago. Since then, I've become the person governments call when they need their darkest secrets buried. I've erased war criminals, protected assets, and deleted evidence of operations that would topple governments if they ever came to light. I've made myself incredibly wealthy, incredibly valuable, and incredibly dangerous, but I've also made myself incredibly alone. When you spend your life in the shadows, when your very existence is built on keeping secrets, you lose touch with what's real. I have 17 different identities, each with complete backstories, financial records, and digital footprints. Sometimes I forget which one is actually me. The irony isn't lost on me. The kid who wanted to expose corruption became the man who helps hide it. But the money was good, the work was challenging, and I told myself I was just another tool in the intelligence arsenal. I wasn't hurting anyone directly. I was just cleaning up messes. That's what I told myself until 3 days ago, when I saw those files and realized I had been complicit in something far worse than corruption. I had been helping to hide the truth about what our governments did to their own people, and now those same governments want me dead to keep their secrets safe. The job offer came through channels I'd never seen before, and that should have been my first warning sign in my line of work. Clients contact me through established protocols. Usually it's Richardson or one of his counterparts at various agencies. People I've worked with for years have my encrypted communication keys. They know my rates, and they understand my methods. But this was different. The initial contact appeared in my most secure inbox at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. The message was brief. Digital ghost services required. Compensation, $50 million USD. Reply if interested. Attached was a cryptographic signature I'd never seen before, but when I ran it through my verification systems, it came back with clearance levels that made my blood run cold. This wasn't coming from a single agency. This was coming from someone with access to intelligence systems. Across multiple nations, someone operating at a level I'd never encountered before. I should have walked away right then. $50 million for a single job was either a trap or something so dangerous that no rational person would touch it. But I'm not always rational, and the technical challenge intrigued me. Who was this client? How did they get my contact information? Most importantly, what kind of job required this level of compensation? I replied with my standard response. Interested. Required details and verification of funds. Came within minutes, which told me they were waiting for my reply. Professional, efficient, and clearly well-resourced. The message contained wire transfer confirmations showing that $50 million had already been deposited into an escrow account tied to my Swiss bank. The money was real. It was already mine, just had to complete the job to access it. The job details were surprisingly simple. 7 specific files needed to be deleted from government servers. 3 from Pentagon systems, 2 from GCHQ in the UK, and 2 from BND servers in Germany. The files were identified by exact timestamps and server locations. Remain anywhere not in backups, not in archive systems, not in temporary files. Complete digital obliteration. It seemed almost too easy. I'd done similar work dozens of times. Government agencies frequently needed embarrassing documents scrubbed from their systems' failed operations. Diplomatic mistakes, intelligence gathering that went too far. This looked like a standard cleanup operation, just on a larger scale. Than usual, the client's security protocols were impressive. I'll give them that. All communications were triple encrypted and routed through servers on 6 different continents. They were using quantum-resistant cryptography that wouldn't be commercially available for another 5 years. Whoever they were, they had access to technology that most governments could only dream of. But what really caught my attention was their knowledge of my methods. They provided detailed specifications for how they wanted the deletions carried out, specifications that matched my personal techniques so precisely that it was clear they'd been studying my work for years. They knew exactly how I operated, which meant they'd been watching me long before they decided to hire me. The timeline was aggressive. 72 hours to complete all 7 deletions. Payment would be released automatically upon confirmation that all files had been permanently destroyed. No questions asked, no follow-up required. Clean, simple, professional. I accepted the job that same day. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags I ignored. The anonymous client, the massive payment, the international scope of the operation. The advanced security measures that suggested resources beyond any single government agency. But at the time, it just seemed like the biggest payday of my career. I spent the next day preparing my infiltration tools and planning my approach to each server system. The Pentagon would be the most challenging. Their security had improved significantly since my last visit. GCHQ and BND would be easier. But I'd need to time everything perfectly to avoid detection. What I didn't know was that I wasn't being hired to delete routine intelligence files. I was being hired to erase evidence of the greatest conspiracy in modern history, and once I saw what those files contained, I would become the most dangerous person alive. Breaking into the Pentagon's servers is like performing surgery on a patient who's actively trying to kill you. Every move has to be perfect, every technique flawless, because one mistake means not just failure, it means spending the rest of your life in a federal prison. I began my infiltration at 2 a.m. Eastern Time. When their system monitoring would be at its lightest staffing levels, my custom penetration software code I'd spent 3 years perfecting was a masterpiece of digital stealth, like the crude tools most hackers use. My software was designed to mimic legitimate system processes, making it virtually undetectable. 2 standard security protocols. The Pentagon's outer defenses were formidable. 17 layers of encryption, behavioral analysis algorithms that could detect anomalous access patterns, and AI-driven security systems that learned and adapted in real time. But I knew their weaknesses. I'd studied their infrastructure for years, mapping every server, every firewall, Every security protocol they used, my entry point was a maintenance subroutine in there. Environmental control system, a backdoor I'd discovered during a previous contract and never reported. The system administrators had no idea that their HVAC monitoring software was compromised, which gave me access to their internal network without triggering any alarms. From there, I moved slowly, methodically. My software created false system logs, generated fake network traffic, and even simulated normal user behavior to mask my presence. To anyone monitoring the network, it looked like a routine maintenance cycle was running. Nothing unusual. It's nothing suspicious. The first file was located in a classified intelligence archive, buried 7 levels deep in their most secure server. As I began the extraction process, I decided to take a quick look at what I was being paid to delete. Professional curiosity, nothing more. I'd always been careful not to read classified material too closely. Plausible deniability was important in my line of work, but this file was different. The header indicated it was a diplomatic communication from January 2019, marked with the highest classification levels I'd ever seen. The subject line read, Project Blackwater, Phase 1, Implementation Protocols. I opened the file and began reading, expecting to find the usual diplomatic language about trade agreements or security cooperation. Instead, found something that made my blood run cold. The document was a detailed communication between high-ranking officials from the United States, United Kingdom, and Germany, discussing the coordinated release of what they called the asset in Wuhan, China. The language was clinical, precise, and absolutely chilling. They were discussing the intentional deployment of a biological agent, the specific timelines, expected casualty rates, and economic impact projections. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the reasoning behind it. This wasn't some rogue operation or terrorist attack. This was a coordinated effort by 3 allied governments to destabilize the global economy in order to consolidate power and eliminate political opposition. The chaos that followed would allow them to implement sweeping changes to surveillance laws, economic policies, and civil liberties that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. My hands were shaking as I continued reading the document. Outlined media manipulation strategies, social media influence campaigns, and coordination with pharmaceutical companies to maximize both the crisis and the profit opportunities it created. They had planned everything: to panic, the lockdowns, the economic collapse, even the public health responses that would make the situation worse rather than better. I sat in my apartment in Berlin, staring at the screen, trying to process what I was reading. This wasn't just classified information. This was evidence of mass murder on a scale that dwarfed any genocide in human history. And I was being paid $50 million to make sure no one would ever see it. The remaining files told the same story from different angles. Medical research documents showing they knew exactly how deadly the agent would be. Economic models predicting the collapse of small businesses and the consolidation of wealth among large corporations. Political strategy documents outlining how to use the crisis to expand government power indefinitely. Each file I opened made the picture clearer and more horrifying. The chaos of 2019 and everything that followed: the lockdowns, the economic devastation, the political upheaval, it was all planned. Every death, every business destroyed, every life ruined was part of a calculated strategy to reshape the world according to their vision. I had been hired to destroy the evidence of the greatest crime in human history. And now I understood why the payment was so large. They weren't just buying my services, they were buying my silence. Permanently, the question was, would I take the money and help them bury the truth forever? Or would I do what the scared 19-year-old kid in me had always wanted to do: expose the corruption and let the world see what their governments had done to them? The classified medical report I found in the GCHQ servers was the smoking gun that proved everything. It was a document that should never have existed, written by Dr. Sarah Chen at the Porton-Down Biological Research Facility, dated December 15, 2018, 6 weeks before the world changed forever. The report was titled Genetic Modification Assessment, Enhanced Transmissibility Protocols for Respiratory Pathogen Research. But what it really documented was the deliberate engineering of a biological weapon designed to cause maximum disruption while maintaining plausible deniability. Dr. Chen's research showed that the pathogen had been modified with specific genetic markers that would make it highly transmissible, but initially appear less deadly than it actually was. The modifications ensured that by the time authorities recognized the true threat, it would already be too late to contain. The report included detailed models showing how the agent would spread globally within 90 days of release. But the most damning evidence was in the casualty projections. The document laid out 3 scenarios: conservative estimates of 2.4 million deaths, moderate estimates of 6.7 million deaths, worst-case scenarios approaching 15 million deaths globally. These weren't hypothetical numbers, they were targets. The report explicitly stated that the optimal impact zone would result in approximately 5 to 7 million casualties over 24 months. Reading those numbers made me physically sick. I had to step away from my computer and try to process what I was seeing. These weren't faceless statistics in some academic study. These were real people, whose deaths had been calculated and planned by their own governments. The report also detailed the economic impact projections with the same clinical precision. Small businesses would be devastated, creating opportunities for large corporations to acquire assets at fraction prices. The hospitality, entertainment, and retail sectors would collapse, consolidating entire industries under the control of a handful of megacorporations. Meanwhile, technology companies, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and logistics operations would see unprecedented growth, but the political implications were the most chilling. The document outlined how the crisis would be used to implement emergency governance protocols that would fundamentally alter the relationship between citizens and their governments. Constitutional rights would be suspended indefinitely under public health justifications. Mass surveillance would be normalized. Economic dependency on government assistance would create a compliant population unable to resist further restrictions. Coordination between the 3 governments was meticulous. The United States would handle the initial media narrative and international response. The United Kingdom would manage the medical and scientific messaging through their influence in academic institutions. Germany would coordinate the European Union's economic response and ensure alignment with the overall strategy. Each government had specific roles in the cover-up as well. Scientific research would be suppressed or manipulated to support the official narrative. Independent journalists investigating the origins would be discredited or worse. Whistleblowers would be prosecuted under national security laws. Social media platforms would implement unprecedented censorship to control information flow. The document even included contingency plans for dealing with truth-emergent scenarios, situations where evidence of the conspiracy might surface. The response protocol was brutal: complete character assassination of anyone presenting evidence, criminal prosecution under terrorism statutes, and if necessary, permanent neutralization of threats to operational security. Reading that phrase, permanent neutralization, I realized how much danger I was in. I wasn't just holding evidence of mass murder. I was holding evidence that these same people had killed others to protect their secret, and they wouldn't hesitate to kill me too. The final section of the report dealt with long-term objectives. This wasn't just about one crisis, it was about permanently reshaping global society. The document outlined plans for recurring health emergencies that would justify ongoing restrictions. It discussed the implementation of digital identity systems that would track and control every aspect of human behavior. It described a future where individual liberty would be completely subordinated to state authority, all justified by the need to protect public health. As I finished reading, I understood why my anonymous client was willing to pay $50 million to erase these files. This wasn't just evidence of a crime, it was evidence of an ongoing conspiracy to control the entire human race. And right now, I was the only person alive who knew the full scope of what they had done. The question was no longer whether I would complete the job. The question was whether I would survive long enough to expose the truth. I was halfway through accessing the German BND servers when I found the document that changed everything: a kill order with my name on it. The file was buried in a subdirectory labeled Asset Liquidation Protocols. And at first I thought it was just another piece of intelligence housekeeping. But when I opened it, I saw my own photograph staring back at me, along with detailed biographical information, psychological profiles, and most chilling of all, a termination authorization, dated for completion within 72 hours of job fulfillment. The document was clinical in its assessment of me as a security risk. It noted my exceptional technical capabilities, my comprehensive knowledge of classified operations, my demonstrated willingness to expose institutional corruption. The psychological evaluation concluded that I was psychologically unsuited for long-term operational security, and posed an unacceptable risk of disclosure. But what really made my blood run cold was the method they'd chosen for my elimination. This wasn't going to be a quick bullet to the head or a staged accident. They planned to frame me as a terrorist who had used my hacking skills to attack government infrastructure. My death would be the dramatic conclusion to a manhunt that would justify even more surveillance and control measures. Even in death, I would be a tool for their agenda. The operational timeline was already in motion. Within 6 hours of my completing the file deletions, I would be classified as a terrorist threat. My known safe houses would be raided simultaneously. My financial accounts would be frozen, and my digital identities burned. Any attempt to surface publicly would result in immediate termination by special operations teams deployed across 3 continents. They had already positioned assets in Berlin. Document included surveillance photos of my apartment building taken just hours before. Teams were in place to move the moment I completed my assignment. I was living on borrowed time, and I didn't even know it. I sat in my apartment, hands trembling, as I processed what I was reading. Everything made sense. Now the massive payment, the rushed timeline, the sophisticated client who knew my methods so well. They hadn't hired me to delete files. They'd hired me to sign my own death warrant. The $50 million wasn't payment for services. It was the cost of making sure I would never speak about what I'd seen. But then I noticed something that gave me hope. The kill order had been generated automatically when I accessed the first classified file. The system had flagged my breach and initiated termination protocols without human oversight. That meant my anonymous client might not know that I'd read the files yet. I still had the element of surprise. I made a decision that would define the rest of my life, however long that might be. Instead of completing the deletions and hoping they would honor their agreement, I began copying every file I could access. If they were planning to kill me anyway, I was going to make sure the truth survived even if I didn't. The next 3 hours were the most intense of my life. While maintaining the appearance of carrying out my assignment, I systematically copied terabytes of classified information onto encrypted drives, medical research documents, financial transaction records, communication logs between government officials, operational planning documents, everything I could find that proved the conspiracy. At 4:47 a.m., I received an encrypted message from my client: status update required, timeline critical. They were getting nervous. My window was closing fast. I packaged the deletion confirmations they were expecting and sent my response. Phase 1, complete. Proceeding with final servers, completion. Expected within 2 hours. That bought me some time, but not much. I grabbed my emergency kit, fake documents, untraceable credit cards, and encrypted communication devices I kept for situations exactly like the sand prepared to run. As I was about to leave my apartment, I took one last look at my setup. The computers, the servers, the sophisticated network I'd built over 9 years of illegal operations. This wasn't just my workspace, it was my identity. Alex Morgan, the digital ghost, was about to die. One way or another, I activated the incendiary devices I kept hidden in my equipment rack. Within minutes, the apartment would be consumed by a fire hot enough to melt steel. No evidence would remain of my methods, my contacts, or my operations. If they wanted to kill Alex Morgan, they'd have to find him first. The irony wasn't lost on me as I slipped out the back exit. I'd spent my career making people disappear, and now I was about to become a ghost myself. Finding allies when you're the most wanted person in the world isn't easy, but I knew where to look. Every major conspiracy has its truth seekers, people who've been digging for years without finding the smoking gun they need. I was about to become their best friend and their biggest liability. The Resistance Communication Hub was hidden in plain sight, a seemingly innocuous forum for discussing vintage computer programming, where real conversations happened, instigonographic messages, hidden inside innocent-looking code snippets. I'd known about it for years but never participated. Now, I needed their help desperately. My first contact was a journalist named Elena Vasquez, an investigative reporter who'd been blacklisted from major publications for asking too many uncomfortable questions about 2019. Her posts in the forum were always coded, but I could see she was systematically documenting discrepancies in official timelines, suspicious financial transactions, and patterns of media manipulation that suggested coordinated deception. I reached out using an encrypted message buried in a discussion about legacy database systems, Digital ghost seeks truth tellers. Have smoking gun. Needs safe harbor. Her response came within hours. Interested. Trust must be earned. Meet in Prague. Charles Bridge. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. Wear red scarf. Bring proof. Prague felt safer than Berlin, but nowhere felt truly safe anymore. As I made my way through the city, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Every face in the crowd was a potential threat. Every camera, a tool for tracking me down. But I needed allies, and Alina represented my best chance of getting the truth out to the world. I spotted her immediately mid-30s. Sharp eyes that missed nothing, carrying herself with the confident wariness of someone who'd spent years investigating dangerous people. The red scarf made me easy to identify, but I could tell she'd been watching me long before I approached her position. "You're either very brave or very stupid to contact me," she said without preamble, as I joined her at the bridge railing.
My communications have been monitored for 2 years.
Anyone who talks to me tends to have unfortunate accidents. I'm probably both brave and stupid, I replied. But I have something you've been looking for your entire career. I handed her an encrypted drive containing a sample of the documents. I'd copied enough to prove I wasn't just another conspiracy theorist, but not enough to put her in immediate danger if we were being watched. She plugged the drive into a specialized device that checked for malware, for displaying the contents on a hardened tablet. As she began reading the medical research documents, I watched her expression change from skepticism to shock to barely controlled rage. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "This is it. This is what we've been trying to prove for 5 years." Alina explained that she wasn't working alone. There was a network of researchers, journalists, whistleblowers, and hackers who had been independently investigating the origins of the 2019 crisis. They'd found pieces of the puzzle's suspicious financial transactions, unusual research funding, coordinated media campaigns, but nothing concrete enough to publish without being destroyed by lawsuits and character assassination. "We've lost 12 people over the past 3 years," she told me. "Some died in accidents that weren't accidents. Others were arrested on trumped-up charges. Few just disappeared entirely. They've been very effective at silencing anyone who got too close to the truth." She introduced me to the network through secure channels. There was Dr. Michael Torres, a microbiologist who'd been fired from the CDC for questioning official research protocols. Sarah Kim, a financial analyst who'd traced billions in suspicious transactions between pharmaceutical companies and government agencies. James Wheeler, a former CIA operative who'd quit after being ordered to eliminate journalists investigating government operations. Each of them had risked everything to expose pieces of the conspiracy, and each had been systematically destroyed by the same people who were now trying to kill me. But together, we represented something they hadn't faced before: coordinated resistance with access to the complete picture. The network had developed sophisticated communication protocols and safehouse networks across Europe and North America. They'd learned to operate like the intelligence agencies they were fighting: compartmentalized information, rotating meeting locations, and constant security awareness. But they'd also learned something more important. The truth was more powerful than any individual. Even if they killed all of us, the evidence would survive. Just needed to find a way to get it to the world before they could stop us. Alina laid out their plan for coordinated information release.
Multiple journalists
Would publish simultaneously across different countries, making it impossible to suppress the story through legal challenges or intimidation. Backup copies would be distributed to dozens of news organizations, academic institutions, and government oversight bodies. Social media campaigns would ensure maximum public awareness before the censorship could take effect.
How?
"The key is timing," she explained. "We need to release everything at once, with enough documentation to make denial impossible. If we do this right, it won't matter how many people they kill afterward, the truth will already be out there." I realized I'd found more than allies. I'd found people who understood what we were up against and were willing to die to expose it. For the first time since discovering those files, I felt like I might actually have a chance to succeed. The government tracking system hunting me was unlike anything I'd ever encountered, and I'd spent 9 years staying ahead of the best intelligence agencies in the world. This was different, coordinated, relentless, and backed by resources that seemed unlimited. Alina showed me the real-time surveillance network they'd deployed to find me, using facial recognition systems, financial monitoring, and digital forensics. They were tracking every Alex Morgan who'd ever existed. My 17 carefully constructed identities were being systematically burned, one by one, as they cross-referenced travel patterns, spending habits, and digital footprints. They've issued what they call a ghost protocol, Alina explained, as we huddled in a basement safe house in Prague's old quarter. It's reserved for their highest priority targets, people who know too much and have the skills to stay hidden indefinitely. The tracking system was terrifyingly sophisticated. They weren't just monitoring airports and hotels, they were tracking every credit card transaction, every cell phone ping, every digital device that might contain my fingerprints. Facial recognition software was running continuously on security cameras across 3 continents. Even my walking gait and posture had been analyzed to identify me in crowded areas, but the most disturbing part was how they were erasing my digital existence in real time. My Swiss bank accounts had been frozen and the funds seized under terrorism statutes. My encrypted email services had been shut down. Even my deep web communication channels were being monitored and compromised one by one. I watched from a secure terminal as they systematically destroyed 9 years of carefully constructed cover identities. Alex Morgan, the freelance software consultant, vanished when they arrested his landlord for harboring a terrorist. Alex Morgan, the travel photographer, disappeared when they raided his storage unit in Vienna. By one, my escape routes were being eliminated. The psychological pressure was enormous. Every time I stepped outside, I expected to see CIA operatives moving to intercept me. Every face in a crowd might be surveillance. Every digital device was potentially compromised. They were forcing me to live like an animal, constantly moving, never staying in one place more than a few hours, unable to trust anyone or anything. But their aggressive tactics also revealed something important. They were desperate. The massive resources being deployed to find one hacker suggested they were terrified of what I might do with the information I possessed. That desperation was both a threat and an opportunity. The close call started on my second day in Prague. Alina and I were meeting at a cafe near Wenceslas Square when she spotted a surveillance team positioning themselves around the building. We had maybe 30 seconds before they moved in for the arrest. I followed Alina through an escape route she'd clearly planned in advance through the cafe's kitchen, down a service alley, into the Prague metro system. As we descended into the tunnels, I could hear vehicles screeching to a stop above us, and men shouting orders in English. "They're getting faster," Alina said, as we caught our breath on a subway platform. "Yesterday, it took them 6 hours to track you to that internet cafe. Today, it was less than 2 hours. They're learning your patterns." The hunt was becoming more sophisticated by the day. They'd brought in behavioral analysts who were predicting my movements based on psychological profiles. They knew I preferred underground spaces, that I avoided crowds when possible, that I had a tendency to seek high ground for surveillance. Every habit I developed over years of avoiding capture was being turned against me, but I had advantages they didn't expect. My years of helping intelligence agencies hunt other people had taught me their methods intimately. I knew how they thought, how they operated, how they prioritized targets. More importantly, I knew their weaknesses. Using a combination of misdirection and digital warfare, I began fighting back. I created false digital trails suggesting I was heading to Romania while actually staying in Prague. I planted evidence suggesting I was working with Russian intelligence to discredit any claims I might make. I even started a rumor that I was planning to auction the stolen files to the highest bidder, knowing it would force them to divide their attention between capturing me and preventing the sale. The cat and mouse game was exhausting, but it was buying us time to prepare the information. Release. Every day I stayed free was another day for Elena's network to verify documents, coordinate with journalists, and prepare backup distribution systems. But I knew it couldn't last forever. It had virtually unlimited resources, and I was just one person with a rapidly shrinking support network. Eventually they would find me. The question was whether I could expose their secrets before they silenced me permanently. Following the money trail led me deeper into the conspiracy than I ever imagined possible. What I'd initially thought was a 3-government operation turned out to be something far more sinister. Shadow network that transcended national boundaries and operated with resources that dwarfed most countries' entire budgets. Elena's financial analyst, Sarah Kim, had been tracking suspicious transactions for 3 years before I arrived with the missing pieces of her puzzle. Working together in a converted warehouse in Prague's industrial district, We began mapping the true scope of the operation using the financial transaction records I'd copied from the government servers. The numbers were staggering. Between 2018 and 2020, over $400 billion had moved through a network of shell companies, defense contractors, pharmaceutical corporations, and private intelligence firms. The money flows weren't random. They followed a precise pattern that revealed careful coordination between entities that should have been competing with each other. "Look at this," Sarah said, highlighting a series of transactions on her multiple monitor setup. Pfizer Pharmaceuticals received $23 billion in government contracts 3 months before they officially began vaccine development. They were being paid for a solution to a problem that didn't officially exist yet. But Pfizer wasn't alone. Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, the major pharmaceutical companies had received massive government funding in the months leading up to the crisis. The contracts were structured as pandemic preparedness investments, but the timing was too precise to be coincidental. They knew exactly what was coming and when. The defense contractors were even more revealing. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and General Dynamics had received contracts worth over $150 billion for domestic security enhancements and civil unrest management systems. They were building the infrastructure to control populations before the crisis that would justify that control even occurred. But the most disturbing discovery was the technology companies. Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft had all received classified government contracts for information management and social media monitoring systems. They weren't just planning to control the narrative, they were building the tools to manipulate public opinion on an unprecedented scale. Sarah's analysis revealed that this wasn't a government conspiracy using private companies. It was a private conspiracy using governments. Same investors, the same board members, the same financial networks, connected all these seemingly separate entities. They weren't just coordinating their response to the crisis. They were the crisis. "The governments aren't running this operation," Sarah explained, as she traced the ultimate ownership of the shell companies, their employees. The real power is in the private networks that control the money flows. The financial records showed connections to organizations I'd never heard of: the Atlantic Council, the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg Group. These weren't conspiracy theory boogeymen. They were real entities with real money and real influence over policy decisions in dozens of countries. Elena's research into media manipulation revealed how the information control worked. The same investment firms that owned pharmaceutical companies also owned major news networks. The same people who profited from the crisis were controlling how the public understood that crisis. It wasn't just propaganda. It was a complete information ecosystem. It's designed to make questioning the official narrative virtually impossible. Dr. Torres provided the missing scientific context. The biological research that created the pathogen wasn't just a government project. It was funded by a network of private foundations and research institutions that operated across national boundaries. The same people who created the problem were funding the research into solutions, ensuring they could control both the crisis and the response. But perhaps most chilling was James Wheeler's intelligence on the enforcement mechanisms, the suicides of researchers who asked uncomfortable questions, the accidents that befell journalists investigating financial connections, the heart attacks that struck politicians who questioned the official response. These weren't random events. They were the result of a sophisticated assassination network that operated with the resources and protection of multiple intelligence agencies. "We're not fighting governments," Wheeler told me during one of our secure communications. "We're fighting a shadow state that uses governments as cover for operations that would be impossible through official channels." The scope was breathtaking. This network had orchestrated the greatest crime in human history, profited from the suffering of billions of people, and used that crisis to implement changes that would ensure their control for generations to come. And they'd done it all while maintaining the appearance of competing interests and democratic governance. But understanding the true scope of the conspiracy also revealed its greatest weakness. The network was large, complex, and dependent on maintaining public ignorance of its existence. If enough people understood how they'd been manipulated, the entire system would collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The question was whether we could expose the truth before they completed their consolidation of power. Because what we'd discovered wasn't just evidence of past crimes, it was a blueprint for the permanent subjugation of human freedom. The surveillance photos arrived in my encrypted inbox at 3:17 a.m., the same timestamp as the original job offer, which I now realized wasn't a coincidence. They wanted me to understand this was always part of their plan. The first photo showed my sister Sarah walking out of her apartment in Seattle, completely unaware that she was being watched. Sarah and I hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since I'd missed our father's funeral but seeing her face in a surveillance photo made my chest tighten with a fear I hadn't felt since I was a scared kid in foster care. The second photo was Professor Williams, my old mentor from MIT, sitting alone in a coffee shop in Cambridge. He looked older, frailer than I remembered, and completely vulnerable. The man who'd believed in me when no one else would, who'd tried to teach me that technology should serve humanity rather than control it. The message that accompanied the photos was brief. Complete original assignment within 24 hours. Delete all copied files. Submit to extraction at coordinates provided. Your compliance ensures their continued health. Non-compliance results in immediate termination of surveillance subjects. They'd found my only 2 weaknesses, the only 2 people in the world I actually cared about. Everything else I could handle. My own death, my own torture, my own destruction. I'd accepted those risks when I chose this path. But Sarah and Professor Williams were innocent. They didn't deserve to die for my choices. Alina found me staring at the photos in our latest safe house, an abandoned factory on the outskirts of Prague. "They sent you something," she said. It wasn't a question, she could see it in my face. Showed her the surveillance photos without saying anything. She studied them carefully, then looked at me with the kind of understanding that only comes from someone who's faced similar choices. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. "My sister. The only person who ever tried to teach me right from wrong." I felt hollow saying it, like something essential had been carved out of my chest. I haven't spoken to Sarah in years, but she's the only family I have left. And Professor Williams, he's the reason I ever believed technology could make the world better instead of worse. Alina sat down across from me, her expression serious. "They're very good at this. Finding leverage, applying pressure at exactly the right moment. How long do you have? 24 hours to complete the original? Job, delete all the files, destroy the evidence, turn myself in for extraction." I laughed bitterly. Extraction. Like they're rescuing me instead of planning to kill me. And if you don't comply, they kill Sarah and Professor Williams immediately. Let's probably make it look like accident, and Sarah gets mugged in a parking garage. Professor Williams has a heart. Attack while jogging. Clean, efficient, untraceable. Alina was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" That was the question that had been tearing me apart for the past 6 hours. Everything I'd learned about the conspiracy, everything we'd prepared to expose to the world at all, meant nothing if the cost was the lives of the only 2 people I loved. But then I thought about the casualty projections in Dr. Chin's report. 7 million dead. 7 million people who had families too, who had people who loved them, who died for a conspiracy they never even knew existed. How could I weigh 2 lives against 7 million? How could I protect Sarah and Professor Williams while condemning countless others to suffer under the Shadow Network's control? "I keep thinking about the numbers," I told Alina. 7 million people died in their operation. How many more will die in their next one? How many families will be destroyed by the system they're building? "That's not your fault," Alina said firmly. "You didn't create this situation. You're just trying to survive it. But I can end it. If I release the files, if we expose the truth, how many future victims do we save? How many families do we protect?" Alina leaned forward. "Alex, listen to me carefully. You cannot save everyone. You can try to save the people you love, or you can try to save the world. But you probably can't do both. In choosing to save your family doesn't make you a coward or a failure." I knew she was right, but I also knew something else. I'd spent my entire adult life compromising my principles for money, for security, for the illusion of safety. Every time I'd told myself that one more job wouldn't matter, that I was just cleaning up messes rather than creating them, that I could change later when I had enough money to be independent. But there was no later. There was only now, this moment, this choice. I could save 2 people I loved and let millions more suffer. Or I could try to save millions of strangers and accept that the people I loved would die. Because of my choice, the irony was brutal. The scared 19-year-old Hood tried to expose, University corruption had finally found a conspiracy worth exposing. But the cost of exposure was higher than he'd ever imagined possible. I looked at the surveillance photos one more time. Then I made the hardest decision of my life. "We proceed with the information release," I said quietly. "All of it. Everything we have." Alina studied my face carefully. "Are you sure?" "No," I admitted. "I'm not sure about anything. But I know that if we don't expose this now, they'll just find new leverage, new victims, new ways to silence anyone who threatens them. The only way to protect anyone is to destroy their power to hurt people." I was about to sacrifice the only two people I loved to save people I would never meet. It felt like another death, the death of the last part of me that believed in simple choices between right and wrong. Creating a virus capable of simultaneously penetrating and releasing classified information from hundreds of secure systems required every skill I'd learned in 15 years of hacking. But this wasn't just about technical capability, it was about timing, coordination, and staying ahead of the most sophisticated cyber defense teams in the world. The virus code package I designed was unlike anything I'd ever created. Instead of a single malicious program, it was a distributed network of interconnected modules that would activate simultaneously across multiple platforms. Each module was designed to look like legitimate system maintenance software, but when triggered together, it would create an unstoppable information cascade. Working from our secure location in Prague, I spent 18 hours straight writing code that would need to bypass security systems I'd helped design. The irony wasn't lost on MII was using techniques I'd developed for the intelligence community to destroy the intelligence community's most closely guarded secrets, Alina and YT. Her network provided crucial support. Sarah Kim helped me understand the financial networks we needed to penetrate. Dr. Torres identified the medical databases that contained corroborating evidence. James Wheeler provided intelligence on government response protocols, helping me anticipate their countermeasures. The technical challenges were enormous. Modern government systems don't just have firewalls. They have AI-driven defense networks that learn and adapt in real time. They monitor every bit of data flowing through their systems, looking for anomalies that might indicate an attack. Virus would need to be invisible until the moment it activated, and then unstoppable once it began. I solved the invisibility problem by disguising the virus components as routine system updates. Each government agency receives hundreds of software patches every week, security updates, bug fixes, performance improvements. My virus modules were hidden inside legitimate update packages that had been digitally signed with stolen cryptographic keys. The unstoppable part was more complex. Government systems have kill switches designed to isolate compromised networks and prevent data breaches. But those kill switches had to communicate with central control systems, and I'd spent years learning how those communication protocols worked. My virus would target the kill switches first, disabling them before beginning the main data release. But the most sophisticated part of my design was the redundancy system. Even if they managed to stop 90% of the virus components, the remaining 10% would still be enough to release all the critical information. The virus was designed to fail gracefully. The more they fought it, the more attention it would draw to the very information they were trying to suppress. The cat-and-mouse game with their cyber defense. The teams began before I even finished coding. They knew I was out there. They knew I had access to classified information, and they knew I had the skills to cause massive damage. Every government agency had cyber warfare specialists working around the clock to anticipate my next move. I could see their countermeasures developing in real time. New security protocols were being implemented across all government networks. Communication systems were being isolated and hardened. They were essentially rebuilding their entire digital infrastructure to keep me out. But they had a critical weakness. They couldn't completely shut down their systems without crippling their own operations. Government agencies need to communicate with each other, with defense contractors, with international partners. The more they tried to secure their networks, the more they had to rely on communication channels I could potentially exploit. The psychological pressure was intense. Every line of code I wrote had to be perfect. There would be no second chances, no opportunity to fix bugs or improve performance. If the virus failed, Sarah and Professor Williams would die. The conspiracy would remain hidden, and millions more people would suffer under the Shadow Network's control. I was also racing against time. My 24-hour deadline was approaching. They would expect me to either complete the original assignment or attempt to run. They had surveillance teams positioned around Prague, monitoring every possible escape route. The longer I stayed in one location working on the virus, the greater the chance they would find me before I could launch it. Alina kept watch while I worked, monitoring government communications and tracking the movement of security teams. They're getting desperate, she reported during one of my brief breaks. They've pulled cyber warfare specialists from 3 different agencies and created a joint task force specifically to stop you. That was actually good news. The more resources they devoted to stopping me, the more they revealed about their own capabilities and priorities. Their desperation was confirmation that what we were planning would work. As I put the finishing touches on the virus code, I realized this was the moment my entire life had been building toward. Every hack I'd performed, every system I'd penetrated, every technique I'd mastered, it all led to this moment when I would use everything. I'd learned to expose the greatest conspiracy in human history. The virus was ready. The countdown had begun. In less than 6 hours, either the truth would flood the internet faster than they could stop it, or I would be dead, and the secret would be safe forever. There was no middle ground, no compromise, no way back. The digital war was about to begin. At exactly 11:47 p.m. Prague time, my virus activated across 17 different networks simultaneously. And the world changed forever. The mass media broadcast override I'd built into the system was designed to be impossible to ignore. Every major news network, every social media platform, every government website suddenly displayed the same message. Classified. The truth about 2019. What followed was a coordinated data dump that made every previous leak in history look like a minor paperwork error. Alina and I watched from our safe house as the chaos unfolded in real time. Her laptop showed feeds from news networks around the world, each one scrambling to understand what was happening as classified documents flooded their systems faster than they could process them. CNN was the first to break the story, probably, because their systems were already configured to handle breaking news alerts. At 11:52 p.m., Anderson Cooper appeared on screen, looking visibly shaken, receiving unprecedented amounts of classified information that appears to show coordinated government actions related to the 2019 health crisis. We're working to verify these documents, the sheer volume and technical sophistication of this release suggests. His feed cut to black. Within seconds, similar cutoffs occurred across every major American network. But it was too late. The information was already spreading beyond their control. Social media was where the real explosion happened. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, every platform was flooded with screenshots of classified documents, videos explaining their contents, and real-time analysis from researchers around the world. The platforms tried to implement censorship protocols, but my virus had anticipated that response. For every post they deleted, 10 more appeared. For every account they suspended, 100 new ones activated. I'd built redundancy into the system that made suppression virtually impossible. The harder they fought to contain the information, the more attention they drew to it. The documents spoke for themselves. Dr. Chun's medical research, showing the intentional engineering of the pathogen. Financial records proving pharmaceutical. Companies knew about the crisis months in advance. Communication logs between government officials coordinating the cover-up, video testimonies from scientists who'd been silenced or killed for asking questions, but perhaps most damaging were the casualty projections. Seeing the cold clinical calculations of human suffering, the spreadsheets that treated millions of deaths as acceptable losses for political and economic gain, that's what really broke through the public's psychological defenses. I watched the real-time reactions flooding social media, videos of people crying as they read the documents, posts from families who'd lost loved ones during the crisis, finally understanding that those deaths weren't random tragedies, but calculated murders. Anger was building faster than any government could contain. Government officials scrambled to respond, but they were completely unprepared for the scale of the revelation. Press conferences were held in multiple countries simultaneously, delivering variations of the same message. The documents were fabricated. The leak was a terrorist attack. The public should ignore any information that hadn't been verified by official sources, but their denials only made things worse. When the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom appeared on television, claiming the documents were Russian disinformation, someone immediately posted a video compilation showing him. In several of the leaked communications, when the German Chancellor denied any knowledge of coordinated operations, Leaked photos appeared showing him at meetings with pharmaceutical executives months before the crisis began. The most dramatic moment came when President Harrison held an emergency press conference from the White House. He'd barely begun his prepared statement, denying government involvement when a reporter shouted, "Mr. President, we have documents showing you personally approved the biological weapons research. How do you respond to evidence that you committed mass murder?" The president's face went white. He looked directly into the camera for several seconds, then walked out of the room without saying another word. That image, the leader of the free world fleeing from questions about his own crimes, became the defining moment of the entire revelation. But the governments weren't the only ones panicking. Corporate executives were holding emergency board meetings trying to figure out how to respond to evidence of their complicity. Defense contractors were seeing their stock prices collapse in real time. Pharmaceutical companies were facing immediate calls for criminal investigations. The chaos extended beyond just the implicated organizations. Financial markets around the world went into freefall as investors realized the scope of the conspiracy. The dollar, the pound, and the euro all lost significant value within hours. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies surged as people sought alternatives too. Government-controlled currencies. Alina monitored the global response with a mixture of excitement and terror. "This is working," she said, scrolling through feeds from Alina. "Dozens of countries. People are demanding answers. Governments are falling apart. But they're also going to fight back harder than we've ever seen." She was right. Even as we celebrated the success of the information release, I could see the counterattack beginning. Military units were being mobilized in multiple countries. Internet infrastructure was being targeted to limit information spread. And somewhere out there, kill teams were being dispatched to eliminate anyone connected to the leak. The digital war had become a real war. And we were about to find out whether the truth was powerful enough to survive the violence that would follow. As I watched the world react to what I'd exposed, I thought about Sarah and Professor Williams. By now, they were probably dead. As promised, when I chose to release the information, instead of completing my original assignment, their deaths would be on my conscience forever. But as I saw millions of people finally understanding what had been done to them, finally seeing the true scope of the conspiracy that had controlled their lives, I knew I'd made the right choice. Sometimes the price of truth is higher than anyone should have to pay, but the price of continued lies is always higher. The international arrest warrant appeared on every law enforcement database in the world within 3 hours of the information release. I wasn't just wanted anymore. I was classified as the most dangerous terrorist in human history, with $1 billion bounty on my head, and authorization for lethal force in any jurisdiction. Alina showed me the warrant on her encrypted tablet as we prepared to abandon our Prague safe house. My photo stared back at me alongside charges that would have been laughable if they weren't so terrifying. Espionage, treason, against multiple allied nations, inciting global panic, and conspiracy to destabilize democratic governments. The irony was perfect. They were calling me a terrorist for exposing their own acts of mass murder, accusing me of destabilizing democracy while hiding evidence of the greatest attack on human freedom in history. I understood the strategy. By framing me as a terrorist, they could justify any action they took to capture or kill me. "Every intelligence agency in NATO is now hunting you," Alina explained, as we gathered our essential equipment. CIA, MI6, BND, DGSE, plus Interpol, and every major police force. They've never coordinated a manhunt on this scale before. The resources being deployed were staggering. Satellite surveillance networks that usually tracked missile installations were now focused on finding one person. Facial recognition systems designed to identify foreign agents were scanning every security camera in Europe. Financial monitoring systems used to track terrorist funding were analyzing every transaction that might lead to me. But perhaps most frightening was the human element. They'd assembled teams of operatives who specialized in wet work assassination, missions that required expertise in making deaths look accidental. These weren't police officers who would arrest me. These were killers who would eliminate me and anyone helping me. The first close call came as we were leaving the warehouse. Elena's early warning network detected unusual movement around our location in marked vans, positioning themselves at strategic points. Communications equipment being deployed. The subtle signs of a coordinated operation. We had maybe 5 minutes before they moved in. Alina led me through an escape route that involved crawling through storm drain tunnels beneath Prague's streets. The tunnels were cramped, dark, and filled with water that soaked through my clothes. Within minutes, but they connected to a subway maintenance area that gave us access to the metro system. As we emerged from the tunnels, I could hear helicopters circling overhead and vehicles racing through the streets above us. They'd missed us by minutes, but the net was closing fast. "They're tracking us differently now," Alina observed as we caught our breath on a subway platform. "Yesterday, they were reactive, following your digital trail after you'd already moved. Today, they're predictive, trying to anticipate where you'll go next." She was right. The psychological profiles they'd developed were allowing them to predict my behavior with disturbing accuracy. They knew I preferred underground spaces, avoided crowds, sought technical equipment for communication. Every pattern I'd relied on for survival was now being used to trap me. The physical exhaustion was becoming as dangerous as the pursuit itself. I'd been running for 6 days with minimal sleep, surviving on adrenaline and stimulants that were starting to affect my judgment. My hands shook when I tried to use keyboards. My vision blurred when I tried to read technical displays, and I was making mistakes that could get Alina killed along with me. But the psychological pressure was worse. Every face in the subway could be surveillance. Every person with a phone might be photographing me. Every delay in reaching a safe location might be the hesitation that allowed them to catch up. Paranoia was becoming a constant presence, making it impossible to think clearly about anything except immediate survival. Elena's network was fracturing under the pressure as well. 2 safe houses had been raided in the past 12 hours. 3 of her contacts had been arrested on terrorism charges. The resistance that had seemed so capable of fighting back was being systematically dismantled by an enemy with unlimited resources and legal authority to use any methods necessary. "We're losing people faster than we can replace them," Alina admitted during one of our brief stops. "They're not just hunting you anymore, they're hunting everyone who might help you." The global response was becoming increasingly militarized. Several countries had declared states of emergency, giving their security services extraordinary powers to monitor communications, search properties, and detain suspects without judicial oversight. Civil liberties that had taken centuries to establish were being suspended within hours, all justified by the need to capture one hacker. But their aggressive tactics were also creating new problems for them. The massive police presence in Prague was generating its own media coverage, drawing attention to the very story they were trying to suppress. Images of armored vehicles in city centers and military helicopters circling residential areas were spreading on social media, making people ask what threat could possibly justify such an extreme response. More importantly, their desperation was validating the authenticity of the leaked documents. If the information was fake, why would multiple governments mobilize their entire security apparatus to catch the person who released it? The manhunt itself was becoming evidence that everything I'd exposed was true. As Alina and I prepared to move to yet another temporary shelter, I realized that we were fighting 2 different wars simultaneously. They were trying to capture me before I could release more information or coordinate with other resistance cells. I was trying to stay alive long enough for the truth to take root in public consciousness, making it impossible for them to return to business as usual even. They succeeded in killing me. The question was which war we would win first there. War to silence the truth, or my war to make the truth impossible to silence. Looking at Elena's exhausted face as she planned our next move, I understood that we were both running on borrowed time. But every hour we stayed free was another hour for millions of people to understand what had been done to them. And sometimes borrowed time is enough to change the world. The dead man switch I created was the most sophisticated piece of self-preserving software ever written. Designed with one simple principle, my death would trigger the release of information, so damaging that keeping me alive became their only rational choice. Working from our latest hideout, a abandoned subway station beneath Prague that Elena's network had converted into an emergency command center, spent my remaining energy creating the ultimate insurance policy. If my heartbeat stopped for more than 4 hours, if I failed to enter authentication codes every 12 hours, or if any of 17 different trigger conditions were met, the dead man switch would activate automatically. The information I'd reserved for this final protocol made the original leak look like a gentle introduction. Personal bank records showing individual government officials profiting from the conspiracy, video recordings of planning meetings where they discussed casualty, targets, detailed operational manuals for future biological attacks, communication logs revealing their plans to eliminate political opposition under the cover of health emergencies, But the most devastating component was the complete membership list of the shadow network Lena and I had uncovered. Names, addresses, family connections, financial holdings, and operational roles for over 3,000 individuals who formed the core of the conspiracy. If that list became public, these people wouldn't just face legal consequences. They'd face the wrath of millions of people whose lives they'd destroyed. "You're making yourself more valuable alive than dead," Alina observed as she watched me finalize the system architecture. "It's brilliant, but it's also a declaration of war against the most powerful people in the world." She was right. The dead man's switch fundamentally changed the equation. Instead of just needing to kill me to protect their secrets, they now had to keep me alive to prevent even more devastating revelations. I'd transformed myself from a liability they wanted to eliminate into an asset they needed to control. The psychological warfare began immediately. Within hours of deploying the dead man's switch, I received a message through encrypted channels. "We acknowledge your insurance policy. We are prepared to negotiate terms for your continued existence." For the first time in a week, they were talking instead of shooting. But I understood this was just a different kind of weapon they would try to manipulate me into believing. I could survive this situation if I cooperated with their damage control efforts. The technical challenge of maintaining the dead man's switch while being hunted was enormous. The system required constant internet connectivity to verify my status and receive authentication codes, but every connection was a potential trace route that could lead them to my location. I had to stay connected to stay alive, but staying connected made it easier for them to find and kill me. I solved this problem by distributing the authentication requirements across multiple systems and time zones. Authentication servers in 17 different countries would each require different codes at different intervals. Even if they found and compromised some servers, the others would still trigger the information release if I disappeared. But the real genius of the system was its adaptive learning capability. The longer I stayed alive, the more information it collected about government response patterns, tracking methods, and countermeasures. If they eventually succeeded in killing me, the dead man's switch would use that accumulated intelligence to make the information release as damaging as possible. Alina helped me test the system by simulating various failure scenarios. We verified that assassination attempts would trigger immediate partial releases, confirmed that jamming my communications would activate backup protocols, even tested whether drugging me unconscious would be detected by the biometric monitoring. Systems. This is either going to save your life or make them so desperate they'll risk triggering it anyway, Alina said after we completed the final tests. "Are you prepared for the possibility that they'll decide the damage from the dead man's switch is acceptable compared to letting you stay alive indefinitely?" That was the gamble. I was betting that the information I'd reserved was so damaging that they'd rather keep me alive and contained than risk its release. But if I'd miscalculated, they decided the immediate threat was worse than the potential threat, then the dead man's switch would be the last thing I ever created. The psychological pressure of living with that uncertainty was unlike anything I'd experienced. Every moment could be my last, but every moment I survived proved the system was working. I was living in a state of permanent tension between victory and death, never knowing which outcome was more likely. But there was also a strange kind of peace in it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't just running from them, I was making them afraid of me. The most powerful people in the world were being forced to consider the consequences of their actions, to weigh the risks of violence against the certainty of exposure, as I prepared for what would likely be my final confrontation with the shadow network. I realized that the scared kid who tried to expose university corruption had finally learned how to fight systems more powerful than himself. Not by being stronger or smarter or more ruthless, but by making the truth more dangerous than any weapon they could use against him. The dead man's switch was more than just software. It was a promise that some secrets are too important to die with the people who discover them. The meeting was arranged in the most unlikely location possible, the middle of Charles Bridge at dawn, surrounded by tourists and security cameras that would make violence impossible, but conversation inevitable. My mysterious client had finally decided to reveal himself. The man who walked toward me across the ancient stones looked nothing like what I'd expected. General Marcus Hawthorne was 73 years old, decorated NATO commander whose distinguished career included tours in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. He moved with the careful dignity of someone accustomed to power but constrained by age. his steel-gray eyes scanning the bridge approaches for threats even as he approached for what he clearly hoped would be our final conversation. "Alex Morgan," he said by way of greeting, his voice carrying the kind of authority that expected obedience without question. "You've caused quite a disturbance." "General Hawthorne," I replied, recognizing him from photographs and the original planning documents I'd discovered. "I prefer to think of it as correcting a historical record." He smiled without humor and gestured toward the bridge railing where we could speak more privately. Early morning joggers and tourists provided perfect cover for our conversation. We were hiding in plain sight, surrounded by witnesses who had no idea they were watching the climax of the greatest conspiracy in modern history. "Do you understand what you've done?" Hawthorne asked, his tone suggesting he was genuinely curious about my perspective. "The chaos you've unleashed, the damage to international stability, the lives that will be lost because of your revelations?" "I understand exactly what I've done," I replied. "I've exposed mass murder and the people responsible for it. The chaos you're worried about is just the natural response of people discovering they've been lied to and manipulated by their own governments." Hawthorne was quiet for a moment, studying my face with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent decades assessing threats and opportunities. "You think we're the villains in this story," he said finally, "but you don't understand the larger context." That's when he began explaining the full rationale behind the 2019 operation. And I realized the conspiracy was even more complex than I'd imagined. According to Hawthorne, the biological attack wasn't just about political control or economic manipulation, it was about preventing something far worse. Climate change, resource depletion, overpopulation. The math is simple, he explained with the clinical detachment of someone discussing logistical challenges. Current population growth patterns were leading toward complete societal collapse within 30 years. Wars for water, mass starvation, refugee crises that would dwarf anything in human history. The original 2019 planning documents I'd found were apparently just the operational details. The real strategic documents showed projections of global population decline through natural disasters, resource wars, and pandemic disease that would kill not millions, but billions of people by 2050. "We chose to manage the crisis rather than let it happen naturally," Hawthorne continued. "A controlled population reduction, coordinated economic restructuring, and the implementation of sustainability protocols that would ensure long-term human survival. 7 million deaths to prevent 7 billion deaths." The numbers were staggering. But what disturbed me most was how reasonable Hawthorne made it sound. He wasn't a cartoon villain plotting world domination. He was a strategist who genuinely believed he was saving humanity by sacrificing part of it. "The people who died didn't consent to being sacrificed for your greater good," I pointed out. "You made that choice for them without giving them any voice in the decision." "Democracy is a luxury that becomes impossible during existential crises," Hawthorne replied. "Would you rather we had held a global referendum on managed population reduction? Would you rather we had announced our intentions and created panic that would have made the solution impossible to implement?" He showed me the original planning documents, the real ones, not the operational summaries I'd discovered in government servers. The scope was breathtaking. Climate engineering projects to reverse global warming, resource allocation systems to ensure equitable distribution of food and water, population management protocols designed to achieve sustainable demographic balance without the chaos of natural collapse. "Everything we did was necessary for long-term human survival," Hawthorne insisted. "The conspiracy you've exposed was actually a rescue operation for the entire species." But then I saw the document that revealed the true scope of their ambitions. The shadow network Alina and I had discovered wasn't just planning to save humanity, they were planning to control it permanently. The crisis management protocols were designed to be permanent, creating a world where individual liberty would be completely subordinated to collective survival as determined by a small group of technocratic elites. "You're not saving humanity," I realized. "You're creating a prison for it. A world where every decision about how people live, what they eat, where they work, even whether they reproduce is controlled by people like you who think they know better than everyone else." Hawthorne's expression hardened. "Freedom is another luxury that becomes impossible during existential crises. We're offering survival. That should be enough." "For who?" I demanded. "Who gets to survive in your new world? Who gets to make decisions? Who benefits from all this control you're implementing?" That's when I understood the final piece of the puzzle. The shadow network wasn't just saving humanity, They were saving their version of humanity, while eliminating everyone who might disagree. With their vision of the future, you have two choices, Hawthorne said, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering an ultimatum. Disable your dead man's switch, agree to permanent containment under our protection, and live comfortably while we repair the damage you've caused. Or continue this destructive path and force us to activate protocols that will make the 2019 operation look restrained by comparison. He was threatening another biological attack one that would make the first one seem mild. But this time, they would blame it on the chaos I'd created. Using my revelations as justification for even more extreme control measures, I realized that exposing their crimes wasn't enough. I had to stop their next operation before they could implement it. The Global Accountability Report I compiled 3 days after my confrontation with General Hawthorne documented the fastest collapse of institutional power in modern history. Within 48 hours of our meeting on Charles Bridge, 3 governments had fallen and arrest warrants had been issued for over 200 high-ranking officials across 17 countries. The United Kingdom was first. Prime Minister Davidson resigned at 6 a.m. London time, claiming personal reasons for his departure. By noon, leaked documents had revealed his personal financial gains from pharmaceutical investments during the crisis. By evening, protesters had surrounded Parliament demanding criminal trials for the entire cabinet. The government collapsed not from external pressure, but from internal panic, as officials turned on each other to avoid prosecution. Germany followed within hours. Chancellor Muller's emergency address to the nation was interrupted by federal police serving arrest warrants for 7 cabinet members. The chaos was broadcast live as ministers were led away in handcuffs while Mueller himself fled through a back exit. The European Union's emergency session devolved into chaos as member nations accused each other of complicity in the conspiracy. The United States took longer, but the collapse was more dramatic. President Harrison's attempt to dismiss the leaked documents as foreign disinformation fell apart when his own CIA director confirmed their authenticity during a live press conference. By dawn, impeachment proceedings had begun in the House of Representatives. And by sunset, the president had been arrested on charges of mass murder and conspiracy against the American people. But the political upheaval was just the beginning. Corporate executives around the world were being arrested as financial investigators traced the money flows. Alina and I had exposed pharmaceutical CEOs who'd profited from advanced knowledge of the crisis, found their assets frozen and their movements restricted. Defense contractors who'd built surveillance infrastructure before it was officially needed faced congressional hearings and criminal investigations. The speed of the collapse stunned even Alina, who'd spent years hoping for exactly this kind of accountability. I never thought we'd see results this fast, she admitted, as we monitored global developments from our new safe house in Vienna. Usually it takes decades for this kind of institutional corruption to face consequences. What really drove the rapid collapse was the public reaction. Millions of people who'd lost family members during the crisis now understood those deaths weren't random tragedies but planned murders. The grief turned to rage, and the rage turned to action. Massive protests erupted in every major city, demanding not just political change, but fundamental restructuring of the relationship between governments and citizens. The financial markets reflected the scale of the transformation. Traditional government bonds became worthless as investors lost faith in institutional stability. Cryptocurrency values surged as people sought alternatives to government-controlled monetary systems. It got stock prices for pharmaceutical and defense. Companies collapsed while renewable energy and decentralized. Technology companies saw its unprecedented growth. But my personal vindication came with a cost that haunted every moment of the victory. 3 days after my confrontation with Hawthorne, I received confirmation that Sarah and Professor Williams had been killed exactly as threatened. Sarah's death was reported as a mugging gone wrong in Seattle. Professor Williams supposedly suffered a heart attack while jogging in Cambridge. Alina found me sitting alone in our safe house, staring at the news reports about their deaths. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know that doesn't help, but I'm sorry you had to make that choice." "They died because I chose strangers over family," I said, feeling the weight of that decision settling permanently in my chest. "I'll never know if that was the right choice." "You chose the truth over comfortable lies," Alina replied. "That's not the same thing as choosing strangers over family. You chose to prevent millions of other families from suffering what yours did." The international trials began within weeks. coordinated through emergency sessions of the International Criminal Court. The evidence was overwhelming. The leaked documents provided a complete paper trail of conspiracy, murder, and conspiracy. That made prosecution straightforward rather than complex. General Hawthorne was arrested while attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. His final statement to the press was chillingly consistent with his worldview. History will vindicate our actions. We tried to save a species too stupid to save itself. Dr. Sarah Chen, the scientist who'd engineered the biological weapon, provided the most damaging testimony. Under immunity agreements, she detailed exactly how the pathogen had been modified, how the casualty projections had been calculated, and how the cover-up had been coordinated across multiple governments and institutions. But, perhaps most importantly, her testimony revealed the plans for future operations that my revelations had disrupted. 3 additional biological attacks had been scheduled for implementation over the next decade, each designed to reduce global population while justifying increased authoritarian control. The trials themselves became a global education process. Day after day, witness testimony and documentary evidence revealed the scope of the conspiracy to billions of people, who were finally understanding how they'd been manipulated. The courtroom proceedings were broadcast live, creating a shared global experience of confronting the truth about institutional power. As I watched the trials unfold from my new identity, Alex Morgan, the digital ghost, was officially dead, replaced by a protected witness with a new name and a chance at a normal life. I realized that exposing the conspiracy was only the first step. The real work was building systems that would prevent future conspiracies from succeeding. The world that emerged from the trials was fundamentally different from the one that had existed before my virus changed everything. Trust in government. Authority had been shattered. But that destruction created space for new forms of democratic participation and oversight that made future conspiracies far more difficult to implement and sustain. The International Transparency Treaty that emerged from the chaos was unlike any agreement in human history, a binding commitment by 127 nations to implement unhackable transparency systems that would make future conspiracies virtually impossible to sustain. I found myself in the unlikely position of being consulted on the technical specifications for these systems. The same governments that had been hunting me 6 months earlier were now asking for my expertise in designing safeguards against the kind of conspiracy I'd exposed. The irony wasn't lost on me, but the opportunity to build something constructive from the destruction was too important to refuse. Working with an international team of technologists, legal experts, and civil rights advocates, we designed transparency protocols that fundamentally altered how governments could operate. Every official communication above a certain classification level would be automatically archived and released after predetermined time periods. Financial transactions involving government officials would be monitored in real time by independent oversight bodies. Research funding and policy decisions would be tracked through blockchain, systems that made secret coordination impossible. But the most revolutionary aspect was the distributed verification network. Instead of trusting government agencies to police themselves, the new systems relied on networks of independent monitors, journalists, researchers, and citizen oversight groups. No single entity could control the flow of information, making the kind of coordinated suppression we'd uncovered technically impossible. Alina led the media reform component of the new systems. The revelation that major news networks had been complicit in the conspiracy had shattered public trust in traditional journalism, creating space for new models of independent, decentralized reporting. Funding came from public sources rather than corporate sponsors, and editorial decisions were made by journalist collectives rather than corporate executives. We're not just changing how information flows, Alina explained during one of our coordination meetings in Geneva. We're changing who gets to decide what information the public receives. The gatekeepers who enabled the conspiracy are being replaced by systems that make gatekeeping impossible. The resistance from remaining shadow network elements was fierce, but increasingly ineffective. It built their power on the ability to control information and coordinate secretly across institutional boundaries. The new transparency systems made both strategies obsolete, forcing them to operate in the open, where their actions could be scrutinized and challenged. Dr. Torres became the director of the new Global Health Monitoring Initiative, designing systems to track biological research and prevent future weapons development. His work ensured that no government or corporation could develop dangerous pathogens without international oversight and public awareness. Sarah Kim's financial expertise proved crucial in creating the economic transparency protocols that tracked money flows between governments, corporations, and research institutions. The complex financial networks that had enabled the conspiracy were now subject to real-time monitoring that made secret coordination virtually impossible. James Wheeler transitioned from intelligence operative to oversight coordinator, helping design systems that would monitor intelligence agencies and prevent them from operating outside legal and ethical boundaries. His insider knowledge of how agencies avoided accountability became the foundation for safeguards that made such avoidance impossible. But implementing these systems required overcoming resistance from entrenched interests who'd profited from the old model of information control. Traditional intelligence agencies argued that transparency would compromise national security. Corporate executives claimed that oversight would stifle innovation. Political leaders insisted that some decisions required secrecy to be effective. We countered these arguments by pointing to the results of unchecked secrecy. 7 million dead from a conspiracy that transparency could have prevented. The moral authority of our position, backed by overwhelming public support, made resistance politically impossible. The most challenging aspect was designing systems that could evolve faster than attempts to subvert them. We knew that powerful interests would constantly seek new ways to circumvent transparency requirements. So the systems needed to be adaptive, learning from each attempt at manipulation and developing new safeguards automatically. I contributed by designing what we called evolutionary transparency systems that became more transparent over time rather than less. Each attempt to hide information or coordinate secretly would trigger enhanced monitoring and reduced privacy protections for the entities involved. The systems were designed to assume that attempts at secrecy indicated potential wrongdoing until proven otherwise. The global implementation faced significant technical challenges. Different countries had different legal systems, different technological capabilities, and different cultural attitudes toward privacy and transparency. Creating systems that could work across all these variations while maintaining their essential functions required innovations in both technology and international law. But perhaps the most important innovation was psychological. The new systems didn't just make conspiracy harder, they made it culturally unacceptable. When every government action was subject to real-time scrutiny, when every policy decision required public justification, when every official communication could be reviewed by independent monitors, the entire culture of governance shifted toward accountability and transparency. Young people who grew up with these systems couldn't imagine how governments had once operated in secret, making decisions that affected millions of lives without public oversight or accountability. The idea that small groups of powerful people could coordinate to manipulate entire populations seemed as archaic as absolute monarchy. But I knew the fight wasn't over. Power always seeks new ways to concentrate itself in the same impulses. That created the conspiracy I'd exposed would eventually find new methods and new justifications. The systems we'd built were strong. They required constant vigilance to maintain their effectiveness. The price of transparency, like the price of freedom, was eternal vigilance. But for the first time in human history, we'd built systems that made that vigilance technically feasible and politically sustainable. The digital memorial archive I created sits on servers in 47 countries, protected by the same transparency protocols we designed to prevent future conspiracies. It contains every document, every video testimony, every piece of evidence. From the greatest cover-up in human history, ensuring that the truth can never be buried again, 5 years have passed since. I sat in that Prague safe house and made the decision that changed everything. Alex Morgan, the digital ghost, is officially dead. His story preserved in the archive alongside the millions of other stories from people whose lives were destroyed by the conspiracy. I live now under a different name, in a different country, doing work that builds systems instead of destroying them. But I still think about those 24 hours when I had to choose between saving 2 people I loved and exposing the truth that could save millions of strangers. Sarah's laugh. Professor Williams's gentle wisdom, they exist now only in my memory and in the archive that preserves their stories alongside the evidence of why they died. Alina visits, sometimes when her work coordinating the global transparency networks brings her to my corner of the world. I don't talk much about the past. There's too much pain there, too many ghosts. Instead, we focus on the future we're building, the systems we're maintaining, the vigilance we're teaching to a generation that never experienced the world before. Transparency. Do you ever regret it? She asked during her last visit as we walked through a park where children played under surveillance systems designed to protect rather than control them, knowing what it cost you personally. It's the question I ask myself every day. Sarah would be 33 now, probably married, maybe with children I'll never meet. Professor Williams would be retired, still teaching students to think critically about technology and power. They deserve to live full lives, to make their own choices about what risks to take and what truths to tell. But I think about the other families too, the ones that exist because we prevented the next 3 biological attacks, the children who grew up free because we broke the systems that would have controlled them, the societies that developed toward democracy rather than technocratic authoritarianism because we exposed the alternative that the Memorial Archive receives. Millions of visitors every year, people researching the conspiracy, learning about how power operates when unchecked, understanding why transparency matters more than comfort. Schools require students to study the documents as part of their civic education. A journalist referenced the archive when investigating new potential conspiracies. Citizens use it to hold their representatives accountable. But perhaps most importantly, the archive serves as a permanent reminder of what happens when good people do nothing while evil people do everything. The conspiracy succeeded for as long as it did not because the conspirators were especially clever or powerful, but because most people found it easier to believe comfortable lies than difficult truths. My work now involves designing the next generation of transparency systems protocols that will prevent the kinds of conspiracies we can't even imagine yet. Power evolves, technology advances, and new methods of control emerge constantly. Our safeguards must evolve just as quickly, staying ahead of those who would use secrecy to harm others. The young people I work with sometimes ask me about the old world, the time before transparency protocols, when governments could operate in secret and corporations could coordinate without oversight. To them, it seems impossible that people once accepted such systems, that citizens once trusted institutions without verification. I tell them that trust without verification isn't trust, it's faith. And faith in power, however that power might seem, inevitably leads to betrayal. The only sustainable relationship between citizens and institutions is one based on transparency, accountability, and the constant vigilance of people who refuse to be governed by others without their informed consent. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I'd made the other choice, if I'd completed the original assignment, taken the money, and let the conspiracy remain hidden. Sarah and Professor Williams would be alive, but millions of others would be dead from the follow-up operations. The world would be sliding inexorably toward technocratic control. People would be none the wiser about their gradual enslavement. The hardest truth I've learned is that some choices can't be undone, and living with their consequences is part of the price of making them. I chose the larger good over the personal good, the difficult truth over the comfortable lie, the uncertain future over the controlled present. I'll never know if those were the right choices, but I know they were necessary ones as I finish updating the Memorial Archive with this year's new transparency victories, another surveillance program exposed, another corporate conspiracy revealed, another government official held accountable for their actions, and reminded that the fight for truth never ends. Each generation must learn for itself why transparency matters, why vigilance is essential, why the price of freedom truly is eternal vigilance. My message to those who come after us is simple. Question everything. Verify independently, and never trust anyone who tells you that some truths are too dangerous for you to know. The moment you accept that someone else should control information for your own good is the moment you begin losing your freedom. The ghost's legacy isn't in the conspiracy. I exposed it's in the systems we built to ensure that such conspiracies can never succeed again. Those systems will only remain strong as long as people remember why we built them and stay committed to maintaining them. Keep watching, keep questioning, keep fighting for truth. The digital ghost may be dead, but the principles he died for must live forever.